Well, hello. Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you for. I see there's some people that have popped on, and I know probably a lot of people will watch afterwards as well. So, um, let's
Hello,
we can go.
everyone.
Yeah, we can go ahead and dive right in. So, thank you for everybody that is joining us right now or watching this. My name is Megan Hansen. I am the co-founder of Recurrent Pregnancy Loss Association. If you've been following us for a while, this is going to be old news, but if you recently found our account, RPLA is a nonprofit organization which is supporting research to try and understand the causes of recurrent miscarriage and what can be done to better treat it. And we also provide a lot of support and education resources to the members of this unfortunate community, of which I am a member. Um, these Ask the Expert sessions, these Instagram Live series that we've done, are really opportunities for us to sit down with people who have expertise in an aspect of loss, a medical aspect or sort of a mental health. Today we'll be talking a lot more about the mental health aspects of this, but it's really just an opportunity for us to learn from people who've spent a lot of time deepening their understanding and expertise in this space. So without further ado, let me introduce Leslie. Leslie Forde. Uh, Leslie Forde is the founder of Mom's Hierarchy of Needs, which is a business that provides evidence-based tools for mothers to reclaim their time from the never-ending to-do list and focus it on their own personal well-being. So she's developed a pyramid or developed a pyramid framework which describes the hierarchy of needs of mothers. It's influenced by Maslow's hierarchy of needs. She also has an extensive research background. And so she actually oversees the longest running national parent study on pandemic and post-pandemic mental health and work-life balance and childcare and infrastructure needs of parents. Um, and then lastly, all of that research and all of that work, she is the founder of sort of a sister company of the Mom's Hierarchy of Needs, which is called Allies at Work, and does a lot of consulting for businesses about how they can better serve and retain working parents. And the last thing I'll say before allowing you to introduce yourself, Leslie, is I I met Leslie, or I shouldn't say I met her. I watched her speak at the Reproductive Health Innovation Summit earlier this year. And actually, I don't even know if you were a speaker. I think you were moderating the session, but just
Yes.
um, it's so evident just by how you were asking the questions and engaging in that conversation that you really, really have a deep understanding of the needs of parents, and more than just the needs of parents, like what the system is lacking and what things can be done to help support parents. So I'm really grateful that I was then able to connect with you, and I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm I'm thrilled that you invited me. I think this topic, the broad topic, and then all the little topics that fall underneath it are very near and dear to me. And it's under discussed, underappreciated. And I think for many who are navigating parenting and trying to conceive and growing their families, all of the added pressures of suffering through loss, all of the added pressures of trying to even think about self care, let alone fit it in, and navigate all the expectations that we have of ourselves, not to mention the expectations that everybody else has. It's a lot. So I think the space in these moments is where we kind of get stronger by talking about it and navigating it as a community. Because if we don't talk about it, it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, so to start, I guess, can you take us back to, I mean, outside of being a parent yourself, what brought you to this space? What kind of started you on this journey of starting this company and doing this particular research on parent well-being and mom's needs?
Absolutely. Well, I completely burned out after my return to work from my second maternity leave, which now was just over 9 years ago. And it was really unglamorous and really not what I expected to have happen. Even though my first return to work was a little choppy, I felt like I kind of had it. I thought, you know what, I've done this before, I kind of have it. But a lot was kind of going on with my then employer. I had taken on new responsibilities while I was pregnant. We were in the midst of a lot of strategic changes, and the company had recently gone public. So a lot was kind of happening in the backdrop. So in the 12 weeks I was away, it was like the whole world had changed there. I went from managing one department to two, but I came back to being short-staffed. I had people who had left, and I had people who had unfortunately needed to take FMLA leave for unplanned reasons. So I felt like I was in a new job. And I was being asked to bring my most clear thinking, strategic, problem-solving self into the work. But, I was sleeping in 90-minute increments. I had a newborn and a toddler. I could barely string sentences together. And I felt over the weeks after coming back that I was just becoming pretty hollowed out. There was a lot of days I would drive to the office, because this is back when we all went to the office, and I didn't remember going there. I didn't remember anything about the drive. I would just kind of I was like sleepwalking.
Yeah.
Or I would get there and I would race through the parking garage and run up the stairs and realize I'd left the breast pump at home.
Yeah.
And it was nearly an hour away, and I would have to drive all the way back. And this was a time in my life where people who did not know me would stop me and ask me if I was okay, because I did not look well to others. And I knew that something bad was happening. I didn't have the words for it. I didn't know that I was burned out. I just knew that I wasn't doing well. And I thought I was facing all these new challenges at work, so the answer must be to just work harder, right? So I'd be typing away, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, trying to shield the glow of the co-sleeper from my computer. And it just became unsustainable. So I did what I thought I'd never do. I left a job I loved. I downshifted and went from managing these two teams to having one direct report. And I negotiated a 4-day week, and I took a huge pay cut. So as you can imagine, it just really felt internally like a fall from grace. It felt like the opposite of career progress that I had worked so hard for. And it still took 2.5 years to recover. So that kind of led me down this path of trying to understand what other people were doing, particularly what other moms were doing. And in a conversation with a dad who was running a mental health company, and coincidentally led me to kind of the professional side of some of this research. That was when I first had access to all these great psychiatrists and psychologists and neuroscientists, because it was a mental health company and they wanted some help on strategy. So a conversation with him led to, why are moms so stressed? And I said, well, how much time do you have? There's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then there's mom's hierarchy of needs. And it was my light bulb moment, because I realized that all the things that I would do and that many of us would do for our mental, physical, and emotional health, which are way up at the tippy top, right? Those are things like sleep and movement and nutrition and stress management, interests, fun, healthy adult relationships. And by the way, if you have a partner, that includes your partner. All of those things, as soon as we have children, we really don't have discretionary time anymore.
Yeah.
And what time we do have is pretty unpredictable. So the bottom 2/3, which are things we really care about, like our kids' health and their milestones, their well-being, our household responsibilities, and even our professional responsibilities or volunteerism for somebody who is not in the paid workforce, all those things are never done things. So when I realized that I could spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, doing those things and still not be done, it kind of gave me some odd permission. I realized that I wasn't going to serve myself trying to do what can't be finished.
Yeah.
And that allowed me to really get curious about making time at the top and understanding, why is it so hard internally? Like, what are my barriers? But also, what are all the socialized barriers? Like, what happens when we hit the systems of work, where we interact with our families, when we interact with our communities, that forces so much self-sacrifice, pleasing, and martyrdom onto the shoulders of mothers.
Oh, that's thank you. And before I ask follow-up questions, can you just also, for people that may not be familiar with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, can you just give a little bit of an overview of that? And then like the mom's hierarchy, like what does it actually look like? And I encourage everybody to actually go and check this out on the website and, you know, join the mailing list. But just for the sake of of explaining it to everybody, would you talk a little bit about that before we ask more questions? Yeah.
Absolutely. No, it's a great question. So Maslow's hierarchy is really designed to be incremental in nature, right? Like, oh, I've got food, check. I've got shelter, check. Like, all the basic human needs for safety and nourishment are down at the bottom. And then it's aspirationally, like, you start moving toward the top categories where you have freedom of thought and the desire to like learn more and improve your knowledge in other ways. And it makes it seem, although I don't think this was what Maslow intended, but it's usually presented as, okay, you do the thing at the bottom, you get to the next level.
Yeah.
The mom's hierarchy of needs is really a hierarchy of priorities.
Yeah.
So what I put at the top are those aspirational categories, like sleep and movement and nutrition and all those things that matter to our health. But the bottom 2/3 are those foundational things for us. Caring for our children, making sure they are safe and healthy and happy and that they meet their milestones. That is foundational for us as parents. That is what we care about more than anything else. And because we care about it more than what's at the top, what happens is we move our time down there thinking, oh, well, I'm really busy doing all these foundational things for my kids and my family, but if I just work harder, I'm going to catch up. And someday I will get more sleep, or someday I'm going to schedule that doctor's appointment, or I'm going to go to that mammogram, or all the things that I've skipped in favor of making time. But what I'm sharing with moms, my secret, not so secret mission, is health for moms is critical. It's not just critical for you, although it is very critical for you. It's critical for your family. Your children do not do well if you don't do well. Lots of studies validate this. Your career certainly doesn't thrive if you're not doing well. And unfortunately, very rarely will the people in your life stop you, pause you, and say, you know what? You look really tired. Why don't you sit down? Let me take over that load of dishes. Let me take care of that. It just doesn't happen in most families. And if you are anticipating that someone will come to save you, it's probably not going to happen. But it's also really essential to kind of flip the model. So thinking about the hierarchy and realizing that those things at the top for your mental, physical, and emotional health, they are foundational to your functioning, and they are foundation to you being able to be present and clear and fulfilled in your family life, and if you have paid work in your professional life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate you being, you know, because the question is, well, what happens if you start to ignore that? And to your point, something like burnout happens. And I love that you're
It's not good.
yeah, well, and I appreciate your openness with it. You know, I've been very open. I also experienced burnout, and it was even before I was a parent, right? It was going through all of the compounded grief from the many losses that I had. And I've talked to a lot of other people in this community that have made similar decisions to leave jobs. Like I had to leave this because it was too much burden of stress, like trying to manage my home or my job and my grief on top of it. And so, you know, I guess what are those, or what have you found in your research? Like, what happens when we ignore those things that are at the top of the pyramid, or, you know, that wellness, that self-care, and what, you know, yeah, what has the data shown out as you've been surveying parents and moms particularly?
Oh, it's a great question. Well, I mean, I'm going to break it down because this is so important to me that everyone who's listening to this critically prioritize their own health. Because what we have right now as moms or as women, like women are at greater risk for stress related everything. That's 80% of autoimmune disease sufferers are women. Women are at greater risk for hypertension, for fatal heart disease, for anxiety, for depression. I mean, the list is a long list, and it's a scary list. So even though if we're looking at parenting there as a whole, right, there's gender differences in health, in access to wealth, and in access to career growth. And right now, the motherhood penalty, right, is the common thread in the wealth, wage, and health gap for women. So we live longer, but we have like 9 years that are less healthy years than our male peers. And so the reason that this is critical now, today, tomorrow, next week, all the time, is that cumulatively caring for your mental, physical, and emotional health has a direct correlation to your longevity, to your ability to fight off illness, to your health span or the healthy years that you have, in addition to just your happiness and your joy. So I tell people this because I don't think we talk about this as women, because self-sacrifice is so conditioned in how many of us were raised and what we've seen and in what is modeled in our society, that we don't think of it that way. We think, oh, well, someday I'm going to take care of myself. Someday I will catch up on all the years of sleep that I've missed, but we don't catch up, right? Statistically speaking. And what I see in my data is a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a disturbing amount of suicidality, a disturbing amount of missed health appointments and missed critical care for mothers, and in some cases for dads as well. But I hear from 97% women in my big study, so it's very tilted toward moms. And this matters, right? This matters to all of us. And you made a really important point about grief as well.
Yeah.
There's so many invisible weights that we carry. The weight of grief in cases of loss, the weight of structural and systemic burdens, yeah, right? Just like the friction that we feel rubbing up against not getting onto the promotional path at work as fast as someone else, the friction that we feel with the healthcare system, the friction that we feel when we're navigating the 50,000 emails for our children that come in from the school district, right? We feel those things, and we internalize a lot of those things. So it does lead to health problems, and it leads to happiness problems.
Yeah.
So this is why burning out is not something that we should take lightly, because burning out is a precursor to a lot of other unfortunate things. And burnout, as you know firsthand, and I know firsthand, it's incredibly hard to recover from. It's not quick. It took me 2.5 years. That's 2.5 years going from a very, very ultra demanding job to what was still a senior role. I was still in a demanding job, but it was less hours. I had less of the nurturing, mentoring, and development that comes with managing other people, because I had one person instead of 2 teams. And it still took me a long time.
Yeah. So, and I guess similar to this question, and you know, we've talked about, you were just talking about, you know, the grief and how that shows up in a lot of different ways. But for couples who are either moms who are currently parenting, dealing with secondary loss, they're having to parent a child or multiple children while going through these losses. Or, I'd say the other half of this community is people that are becoming parents in the wake of all of this trauma. So in a mindset already of sort of extreme stress. How does that impact that like postpartum period? Or, what is there a correlation between like higher levels of depression, anxiety, postpartum depression and anxiety, and coming out of some of these from your perspective and experience? Understanding that you're not a medical professional and we're just like talking, but you know what I mean? Like, you've seen a lot of data, you've talked to a lot of people. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let me kind of characterize that, because I think it's a really important question. And I'm not a clinician, I'm not a medical person, I'm a researcher, and I've been fortunate to interview a lot of clinicians and a lot of researchers who are health researchers. There's a whole field of study around like epigenetics and basically how stress and anxiety and our experiences are passed down generationally to our children. It's often looked at in communities of color or communities that have experienced trauma, displacement, severe wars, famines, extraordinary events that lead to physiological stress for mothers and fathers, and that actually has an effect generations on. So the short answer is there a tie? Yes, of course there's a tie.
Yeah.
However, not to add more burden to moms who already feel extremely burdened and guilty about everything, because we're here together in this. What I think you should focus on is knowing that the antidote to all of that physiological stress, what helps bring cortisol down in your body, are those top of the mom's hierarchy of needs activities, right? And it's not just because they're on the top of the mom's hierarchy of needs. These are all evidence-based. People will tell you that getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night is really critical, right? People will tell you that adequate nutrition, stress management, healthy adult relationships, all of those things, interests, learning, creativity, all of those things have long storied histories of being really good for us. So those are the things that help you manage stress, because you can't control every stressor. You cannot control losses. You cannot control external conditions like inflation and layoffs and all the other things that are happening in the world that are pretty serious, that are impacting people's stress right now. But the part that you have some agency with, depending on your life, your circumstances, your socioeconomics, and frankly, how much psychological safety you have in your home and how much psychological safety you have in your workplace. Having access to, like if you go out and get some fresh air and take a walk around your block, or if it's a walk in your building, or if it's walk up and down your stairs, or if you play a little music and relax, if you dance in your living room when nobody is watching, or you dance with your children, or you call a really good friend, or you call a sibling, or you call a parent. Those are the little things that do reduce cortisol in your body. If you're partnered and you give your partner like a really lovely hug, there are things that reduce stress. I was attending a conference last year. Dr. Andrew Huberman was speaking. He does a lot of like longevity, health span research, and he's one of the people that I kind of follow in this work, but I've also interviewed a lot of people more personally. But what he said was basically, if you're stressed as all get out all day long, there's some evidence that suggests that if you get really good, restorative, high quality sleep, that you're good. That the sleep will kind of counteract being in really stressful daily life. Now, I haven't looked at that data myself, but it's, I think, just another directional indicator that sleep, movement, healthy, fun activities, being around people who care about you, being supported in a community, and that can be your virtual community, that can be your local community, that can be your extended family, like in the ways that you define it. Find those mechanisms of support and those little spaces of joy. And what I recommend to people to do is, I'm like, put it on the calendar. It's not going to just happen. Put it on the calendar. I know it seems nutty to put 5 or 10 minutes on the calendar, but put it on the calendar. Yeah. And give yourself something every day. Yeah. It doesn't have to be a lot. If you have little ones and you are parenting and navigating the journey or navigating loss or any aspect of the difficulties of the journey when you are trying to conceive and you already have parenting responsibilities, close the door, splash some cold water in your face, put the toddler in the bouncy or the playpad, do the things that give you just a little breathing room. And those things were incredibly helpful for me. Yeah. And the evidence suggests those things are incredibly helpful in general.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you sort of pivoted right into where I want to go next, which is the how and the what, right? Because I do think, I was thinking about this, right? And it's like, particularly for people that have gone through infertility and recurrent loss, there's the medical piece that's already like, oh my gosh, I have to do this perfectly. I have to behave perfectly. Otherwise, that I have to eat the right foods, or I have to find the right regimen, or I have to do. And I think that sometimes just culturally, the feeling of self-care and wellness can sometimes take on that tone as well of like, oh my gosh, and now on top of all of this, I have to find time to exercise, and I have to eat right, and I have to do all the right things to make myself feel better. So, and I know it's not that. So what is it? How much time is it? What types of activities are there? Are there the right types of these types of activities? And then operationally, how do you start to carve out those blocks within a crazy life?
Okay, so these are such good questions.
It's like all the questions.
These are all the questions. These are all the questions. Okay, so there's a bunch of things. Yeah. So first of all, the fertility journey, which as I've shared with you, I've been on. The loss journey, which I've shared with you, I have been on. So I have had these experiences.
Thank you for sharing. I didn't want to ask because I wasn't sure how publicly you'd share, but I know this intimately, what that feels like. So thank you for sharing with our community, and I'm so sorry to know that you're part of this club, but I appreciate that perspective so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Absolutely. Well, part of what's there is, and you described it well, it's hypervigilance, because you are in a medical process that requires a lot of precision. Like if you are going through the fertility journey, it's like, oh my gosh, you have to be there at a certain time. You have to take your shots at a certain time, and you have to be at the hospital at a certain time, and you have very little predictability to it. And it's all based on your levels and your monitoring. And that's just, not having control is a huge stressor. Mm-hmm. And having something that you are in the middle of that has very high stakes, lack of personal control, all of that is a recipe for being stressed. So I think just acknowledge that. And sometimes self-care for people does not look like a walk or a healthy meal. Sometimes self-care, when I've interviewed people and see it in my data, sometimes self-care is binge watching Netflix. Sometimes self-care is a bowl of ice cream. Sometimes self-care is a good cry. And there are things that you might need in the moment to restore yourself, to soothe yourself. I mean, are there things that are a little maladaptive for self-care that I wouldn't call self-care? Sure, right? I mean, I see in my study people going on and off of legal and illegal substances all the time, right? There are things that have potentially harmful effects to your body that I would not put in the category of self-care. But there's so many lightweight little things that are inexpensive and fun and inexpensive or free and take 5 minutes or less, like the dancing, the deep breathing, the meditating, the splashing cold water on your face, the standing outside and letting the wind blow on your face. Any of those things are accessible. And what I recommend to people, if you can, it doesn't necessarily work with babies and toddlers where you have extremely unpredictable time. But if you have a window where you generally have childcare, if you're also caring for adults, you might need to generally have elder care or adult care. But if you have a window where you generally have childcare, or if you have a window where you reliably have some time to yourself, in our research, 9 out of 10 things that moms like to do for self-care are best enjoyed alone. It is the solo activities, right? It's taking the class or walk or reading a book or just having quiet, right? Whatever that looks like to you, look at a window where you're most likely to have coverage, care coverage, a window where you have the energy for the thing you want to do. So I tell people, like, don't decide to start training for a marathon at night if you're a morning person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Don't start writing your dissertation in the middle of the day if you have a very dynamic paid work situation where your time is interrupted constantly, right? Like,
Yeah.
find a window where you're likely to have a space of an hour if you can get it, but it can be 5 minutes if you can get it, where the coverage is there, your energy is there, and the time to do what you want to do is sufficient. And just bake that in. And if you can put a repeating calendar entry like every day, like, bravo. If you can just put a repeating calendar entry once a week, that's okay.
Yeah.
But with anything that you choose for your self-care routines, right? And I think of self-care in the way that Audre Lorde, who coined the term, meant it, right? Not spa days and smoothies and things like that, but actually she described it as an act of resistance, an act of resistance in a world that doesn't necessarily value our well-being.
Yeah.
So if you think about it in the activist sense of the word, it changes your relationship to self-care. It fires you up, makes you feel a little bit feisty about making sure that you fit it in. But to block off that time, you do your best, but things will happen.
Yeah.
So I always say have a plan B and a plan C. Like, there are days where I've gone running for an hour in the morning by myself. It's fantastic. And then there have been days where I've had the running stroller and an umbrella and the rain shield, and I've been running for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then there have been days where I have a flight for work. This was in my pre-pandemic life, where I would go to the gym at 5:30 and it was dark and it was snowing, and I would run for 10 minutes before I had to, get ready to go to the airport. So for me, what matters is running every day.
Yeah.
And if it's 5 minutes, if it's 55 minutes, it's not relevant to me. I've reduced my attachment to it being perfect. The consistency is what allows me to feel like I'm caring for me. And so I recommend to others, find a thing that's your thing like that. Maybe it's a walk. Maybe it's just time outside. Maybe it's journaling. Find the thing and come up with a plan B. So if it can't happen in the morning, then maybe it can happen during lunch. If it can't happen during lunch, then maybe it can happen late in the day. If you don't have coverage and it's childcare coverage that you need, maybe you ask a neighbor who has kids the same age and they play together while you walk some circles in your neighborhood, or you walk some circles around the playground, as I have many times, right? So just find those adaptations that allow you to get in self-care, make you feel restored, but know that it doesn't have to be perfect for it to be helpful.
Yeah. No, I think that's such helpful advice. And so much of that, I'm going to kind of go back over a couple things that you said, that because they are important to me too. I think sometimes when we think about self-care, we get into almost this, like fantasy escape dream kind of thinking, like, okay, I listen to you and I'm like, I'm going to get up and that's what I should do. I should get up before my kids and I should do X, Y, and Z. And then it's taking that, coming back to reality and being like, I'm not a morning person. Like, I'm never going to do that. So what are those times that you can be more accountable to yourself? And like, what are those activities that are enjoyable to you, not the activities that it feels like you should be doing? And so I appreciate both those things so much.
100%.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to say, for anyone who's at any stage in this journey, sleep is probably the most important thing you can do. So if the choice is getting up earlier or getting more sleep, physically, most of the data will suggest that getting more sleep is more important. So recognize that if you need rest, get the rest. Like don't like should yourself into a bunch of activities that add layers of stress when what you really need is more decompression time.
Yeah. And can I to kind of go back, as we talk about how does this look different? This is a curiosity question, but do you have different advice, or how does this look different for the different stages of parenting? In that immediate, like kind of postpartum first year phase, particularly if you maybe are dealing with some postpartum depression, anxiety, some anxiety from coming off of all the work to be a parent, are there different tips or strategies for caring for yourself than there are when your kids are school aged? Or are they the same? I don't, I'd be curious what your data shows and what your personal experience is.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the postpartum period, or that year after, and pregnancy itself too, right? They're really critical health windows for physical health and mental health. So what I advise to people there, and this has been backed up when I've interviewed OB/GYNs who say, what should you do? Like, community support is one of those things. And even before I spoke to experts about it, like, if you have anyone in your life, if it's a parent, if it's a sibling, if it's a friend, if it's a partner, if it's neighbors, like, build a village or a mini village or something resembling a village, because having lots of help, having people you can talk to, having resources is really critical, because you're tired.
Yeah.
And you're navigating physically a lot of change, and warding off anxiety and depression is also life-saving. So I say layer on the support. I'll unapologetically layer on the support and ask for help. The other thing that I think you mentioned as it relates to school age kids and transition, even older kids. My oldest is now 13, right? So I'm just like beginning to get my little feet wet in the teen years. Something that I did not expect, although people I think tried to tell me, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to believe it. You have a lot more emotional labor tied with having really, really important conversations with your children. They're not just asking you, which sippy cup or what color or read me another story, mommy.
Yeah.
Right? Right. Yeah. Read me another story.
Yeah.
It's like they're asking you about social situations. They're asking you about what's happening in the world. They're asking you about a difficult thing that they might have overheard on the news, right? They're asking you questions that require real thought and take a lot of mental energy and sometimes emotional energy. So leaving space for that, and leaving space so that you can have those conversations with your children and feel like you're not pressed up against a schedule that doesn't allow for that, is helpful for people, but it's hard to do that, especially with paid work being as demanding as it is in almost every field. But that's, I think, critical. The other piece is logistical. Like getting kids getting kids who cannot drive, which is kids for a very long time, to and from sports and music and lessons and singing and activities, and if whatever your things are that you feel are critical for your kids, or if your children have special needs, if they have complex medical needs or health issues, getting kids to and from therapy appointments or physical therapy appointments, all of that is really time consuming. Scheduling appointments with the medical system is time consuming. Finding specialists is time consuming. So to the extent that you can, if your benefits in your job have any kind of support help for caregivers, any kind of legal support help if you need legal help, whatever it is, like, avail yourself of it. If you have people in your life who are really good at finding a great specialist, or people who are doctors, then ask them. Say, hey, who would you recommend for X, Y, or Z, to shortcut the research time? Because it's It's a considerable amount of time and energy that people underestimate. The other thing I would recommend is if you don't have mental health support for yourself and you are therapy curious, go for it, right? Like find someone who supports you. Find someone you can talk to. Find someone who you can navigate with. And even if you cannot avail yourself of it, you cannot afford it, you don't have someone in your area or virtually that you can access right away, talk to people you trust, talk to people you love, like have dialogue about what's going on. All of those things are really useful for people. But making space, more space for physical time with your kids and more space for research and navigation time and interacting with the school, interacting with doctors, like as they grow, those needs become exponentially more. And I wish I had known it. I think I maybe didn't want to know it, but it is true.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I'm like, don't tell me it's gonna get harder. Come on.
Right?
No, but
I didn't want to know it. I just was like, la, 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 don't
yeah.
tell me. But it is helpful to your point, as you think about career decisions, as you think about sharing the workload with your partner if you are partnered, if you're thinking about sharing the workload with other family members, like give yourself as much space as possible and anticipate that you will need as much space as possible and ask for help unapologetically as much as possible.
Well, and I notice a lot of the advice, and it's interesting to think about this. Like I'm generally I'm a pretty like introverted and solitary person, and so much of this is like you need that support structure. You need to seek out those people because you cannot go through this alone. And so I like what you're saying is resonating with me in the like, okay, so if you recognize that this is sort of a shortcoming or a limitation of the self, like put things in place to be able to support you in those times when you're going to need it, like get ahead of it a little bit. So I really, I'm like, oh, okay, thinking about, and to your point, like therapy is wonderful. I always advocate for mental health support. It's also a luxury, sometimes inexpensive, but there are plenty of free support groups or groups online that you can find community in a free way. You can find community in a flexible way. Like, but it sounds like there's really that need for community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'll just add, because a lot of my work is with employers and
Yes.
going into
Please.
organizations to support parents.
Yes.
Like a lot of companies are providing like some free therapy sessions. They're providing employee assistance plans or EAPs where if you have an emergency, you have a phone number or a hotline to navigate to mental health resources for yourself or for someone in your family. Organizations are giving like Headspace memberships and all types of like meditation and mindfulness resources. So you might have some paid for you benefits through your employer or through your partner's employer if you are partnered that allow you to reduce the cost of some of those things. And introversion is really important. If you are introverted, know that if it's really uncomfortable to ask for help or if it's really uncomfortable to extend yourself, maybe you ask someone to ask on your behalf. Like maybe your partner does the asking. I'm not an introvert, although I've become more so over the years, but I do like, I don't like asking people for help. I'm very uncomfortable about it. But I felt very comfortable asking my mother for help, and I'm very fortunate that my parents are very helpful and my parents are with us. And so after each pregnancy, my mother stayed with us for like 6 weeks. So if you can have somebody in your life that you feel comfortable asking for support and you have that available to you, then absolutely go for it.
Well, and I think that's such sage advice as well, and I'm laughing because I'm like, I did that. I had my husband like do my therapist interviews when it felt like too much, or like I had him come to the appointments with me and take notes because it was, but we don't need to go into that. I did want to pull more on the thread of, I know you do a lot of work with employers, and so I wanted to kind of use this last little bit of time. Not everybody, obviously not everybody is a working parent, but as you're navigating some of these tougher things, like parenting is generally tough, but parenting and then also going through a loss or trying to become a parent while navigating infertility and loss. What advice do you have that can help people advocate for those types of needs in the workplace? Like, what have you heard from employers that, what have you heard from that side? And then what can we do in those settings to carve out that space to meet our needs more effectively?
It's a great question. So I think there's two paths that I recommend here. One is, if the psychological safety is there with your manager, then have a one-on-one conversation with your manager and say, listen, I'm in the middle of, and you can disclose whatever feels comfortable to you.
Yeah.
You can say, I'm in the middle of a medical process, or I'm in the middle of the fertility process,
Yeah.
or I'm in the middle of navigating a loss, or whatever you feel comfortable sharing. You don't have to disclose anything that doesn't feel good to you.
Yeah.
But if you say, hey, over the next few months, I'm going to have some additional medical appointments. I'm going to have some unpredictable medical appointments, and I'm just going to need some grace. I've already thought of one or two people who could be my backup if I'm not available, or I've already thought of some ways that we can engage with other departments for coverage. So it's helpful, I think, if you come to your manager explaining that you are going through a medical process. Try to predict to the best of your ability the time frame that you're going to need support for. I've had employees disclose very personal things to me, and I've been honored that they trusted me. Like, I have had people with bipolar disorder. I've had people with high-risk pregnancies. I've had people with terminally ill family members who have told me that this is what's going on, I'm going to need, and I've really honored and appreciated that. And they knew that they could trust me, that if they didn't want me to share it, I wasn't going to share it. If they wanted me to ask for more support from HR, that I would ask for more support. So I think that's path one. If that path isn't available to you because your manager is not a supportive manager, shall we say, or you don't have that kind of psychological safety, then this is where strength in numbers comes in. On the employer side, I'm often working with employee resource groups. It's mostly larger organizations, but even some smaller organizations will have a parent or caregiver affinity group, employee resource group, business resource group. And then you have kind of the safety of crowds, and you can say to other parents, other caregivers, other people who might understand, here's what I'm going through. How did you navigate this with your manager? Or as a group, I interviewed a woman, her name is Shira Center, and she, with a group of other parents, not even formally part of an employee resource group, pushed for and ultimately won a better parental leave policy for Boston Globe Media. And so they felt like the policy wasn't competitive, and they mounted a very good business case, and it took them time, and they had to get advocates. But as a group, they advocated for better support. So that's another path that you have available to you if the manager path is just not a good path.
Yeah. What do you hear on the other side from like the employers in terms of their desire or their, and obviously there are some really stellar like employers that are really trying to be cutting edge in this, and then there's a whole spectrum. But what, from your work in that space, like what do you hear from their side about their desire to want to be able to retain and support working moms?
It varies by company.
Yeah.
I think on a positive note, across every organization, whether they're sensitive to the different needs that parents and caregivers have, and particularly sensitive to some of the gender differences in health needs, postpartum needs, things of that, even if they're not sensitive to that, almost every employer is more sensitive to mental health needs because of the pandemic, because of the epidemic rates of burnout. They have an awareness for that. So that could be the avenue that allows you to have the conversations. But there are employers who realize that parents are struggling, not just struggling 4 years ago when schools and daycares were closed, but struggling now.
Yeah.
And they have added in layers of parental and care benefits like subsidized childcare or care navigation services or elder care navigation services. So I see those, and I used to work in the care industry, so not to go down a rabbit hole, but there's a lot of services that employers can provide as benefits. And that space has been a growing space in the past, like probably 10 years. So some employers are good about putting their money behind their concern and investing in it. The other thing that I've seen is just some employers say to me, you know what, Leslie, we really think what you're saying is important, but a lot of our managers don't have families, or they don't have families yet. One of my first clients, when I kind of did this full time 4 years ago, said the average age of our managers is 28. And they do not know what it is like to be parents or caregivers. So we want you to help create empathy for this audience and help them understand. Little background noise. So if they understand that empathy needs to happen and that people who don't have the lived experience need to know, oh, hey, what is it like when, you know, your child is sick repeatedly during the cold and flu season and no daycare in the world will take them? Or what is it like when, you know, suddenly your caregiver of choice is sick and cannot come? Or what is it like when someone says at the last minute, oh, hey, let's go to this conference, and assumes you can hop on a plane at a moment's notice, right? Or even for single parents, this is true. I hear this from dads in addition to moms, like, hey, my manager has like a stay-at-home partner and has no idea why I have to pick up my kids, and how do I have that conversation? So I hear employers genuinely interested, for the most part, in how to solve this problem. I often do a lot of manager training and sometimes research, because sometimes employees won't ask for what they want because they don't feel psychologically safe to do so. So sometimes anonymous information gathering is the way to help people like share what they need to share or what's hard. I've also heard sometimes from younger employees who do not have children that they actually have caregiving responsibilities. They might be caring for a grandparent. They might be caring for a sibling. There's a lot of substance abuse in the world right now. So sometimes people who you would not expect are caring for somebody who has a substance abuse problem. So all of those things are happening, and it's often very invisible. So employers, I think, are curious, but they don't always bridge this gap in communication. They think they know what they need to do, but sometimes they need like the extra information from you if you feel like you can give it without it limiting your career, or they need the added lift of industry best practices, and you can share it with an HR person if you have that kind of comfort. You can say, hey, off the record, I noticed that our parental leave policy is not really as long as most people's, or I noticed that we aren't doing any childcare subsidies even though we are in very hands-on essential work roles. So other people in the industry are doing this. Can you consider this? You can have those off the record conversations and ask.
Yeah. That's great. That's all great advice. We're coming to the end of the hour, so I have two final questions for you. One is pretty straightforward. Where can people go to learn more about Mom's Hierarchy of Needs? Where can people find you? So I'll let you ask that or answer that one first.
Well, momshierarchyofneeds.com has like all the things. I'm on most social platforms. Haven't figured out how to do TikTok yet, so I'm not there yet. But
too much.
Exactly. Like here on Instagram, you know, mom_hierarchy. There's a community for moms, and there is a platform. I have also a free version of the Time Check Wellness app so that moms can actually track their top of the Mom's Hierarchy of Needs time. And the intention is not to say, hey, you need more willpower, get up earlier, take more steps. It's none of that. It's how much time are you spending up here? And hey, we're going to give you some gentle advice on how you can spend more time up here, because we know you're doing all the things. So it's really a different approach to wellness, looking at it through the lens of discretionary time, because that's what I see in all my data. And then if you happen to be a manager, a leader, an HR person, an employer, check out the Allies at Work and Employer Services, because I have a ton that I offer organizations to support caregivers in the workplace.
Thank you. Well, everybody do those things. And then my last question for you is, you, as you said, you have experienced, you have your own journey with pregnancy loss, and burnout, and obviously parenting. What, that's one piece of advice would you give to this community? What one thing do you hope they would take away or do following this conversation to help support their personal well-being?
The biggest piece of advice that I wish I'd known then, each time, was just don't expect to be okay right away. Like, it's a very iterative process, and it is a process. And some days you will feel really good, and some days you will feel really bad. Or some days you will feel really good, and then you will have moments of feeling really terrible. And just understand that that will happen, that it is normal, that it does not mean that you're not doing enough or working hard enough or recovering enough. It's none of that. It's an iterative process. So give yourself space for it, give yourself time for it, and give yourself as much rest as possible, because the more physically depleted you are, the harder it is to recover emotionally.
Yeah. Leslie, thank you so much. I don't know. I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I appreciate your perspective, and thank you so much for everything. And for everybody, I appreciate this, and I will post all the information of where you can find Leslie after this, and hope that this was as meaningful to you as it was to me. But thank you.
Thank you. Well, please, I believe you can share this with me.
I will.
And then I can post it from my page as well. This was a delightful conversation.
Awesome.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. All right. Take care.
Bye.